Sorry, the date is wrong on the presentation. I was expected to be here yesterday.
All right, we are live again. It's the Senate
You assume
Transportation.
we even know what day it is.
Apologies, I didn't get to update it last night.
We are live again. We are the Senate Transportation Committee, and we're going to continue our discussion this morning with zero fare public transit. We have a couple of folks from Green Mountain Transit and also from the Agency of Transportation. We have Clayton Clark, the General Manager, and Nicholas Voss, Director of Finance from Green Mountain Transit. Okay, folks, introduce yourselves and what's going on here today. You're the new person in Chittenden County, is that correct?
Correct. Senator Mazza, I'm Clayton Clark, the General Manager since January 10th, and have about a 20-year history of providing human services in the state, both Veterans Affairs, regulating healthcare, and lastly, managed a long-term care facility during the pandemic.
Oh,
And
big change for you.
big change, but you know, transportation I'm finding is still very much a human service, and
Yes, it is.
and so I'm finding that it's been a much more natural transition than I expected it to be, and really am enjoying the interconnectivity of the role and the way transportation connects to everything from social equity to to climate concerns, and it's been a job that has puzzles. I love puzzles, and so we're going to talk a little bit about one of the puzzles we're trying to solve, which is our return to fare service. We requested some bridge funding to help us do that in a way that will be more successful. And what we wanted to do today is that Nick Voss, our finance director, is going to go over a little bit of our financials, because I think that in seeing those, it helps understand how GMT operates. So kind of the thought of, if you follow the money, you kind of understand how operations work. We're going with that philosophy here. And then I'm just going to dive into a little bit of our support for the T-bill as it was introduced in the provisions there that we are seeking. And so one of the things I want to make sure it's clear is that even though zero fare is the title here, you know, we're not asking for zero fare in perpetuity with this ask. Zero fare is something that the Board of Commissioners values, but we value service protection, making sure that we have as much service as possible over free fares, and so that's why we've made a strategic decision to return to fare service. But with that, I want to turn it over to Nick, and Nick will guide you through how we pay for what we do.
Good, thank you. Yes, good morning, Nick.
Well, thank you everyone for allowing us to come in. This brings back some fond memories. I was a budget analyst a couple of years ago. I used to sit in these committees, most of the appropriations ones. So never thought I'd be in front of it, but here I am. So yeah, let's get started. Just gonna go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So just the plan for today. You know, just provide an organizational overview of GMT, you know, what we do, the services we provide, a funding summary, you know, the money that comes in, how do we spend it, and then really kind of the most important thing is our financial outlook, which, you know, is really important in the coming years as the COVID money that came in during the pandemic begins to dry up. So we certainly have some challenges over the next couple of years. So starting with the organizational overview, so just some history. GMT was actually funded by the legislature in 1973. And then in 2011, it got a little bit larger. So, you know, we merged with Green Mountain Transit Agency, which provides transit services in Washington and Franklin and Grand Isle. And then in 2016, GMTA was actually rebranded as GMT. In terms of governance, we have a 13-member Board of Commissioners. Representation is from Burlington, South Burlington, Winooski, Essex, Shelburne, Williston, Milton, Heinsberg, and then Washington, Lamoille, Franklin, and Grand Isle County. Colchester is actually a non-voting member, so they are a member. They should be added to this, but they don't have a seat or a vote.
Why don't they want to join? What's their issue?
I think Aaron Frank, the town manager, is going to be putting that up for a vote, maybe next year or the year after. But they certainly are a member. They just don't have it.
Because I know you stop at the apartments on Sunny Hollow there. You stop there.
Yeah.
And then you stop at the our senior housing, I guess you're on the other end, you go there.
Mhm.
But I never could understand why.
Plaza store?
No, they don't go by there.
Colchester's been flirting, we've been dating, GMT and
Yeah.
Colchester's been dating for a long time, going steady, but
I
they're
gotta-
moving
I gotta-
very soon.
Know more about that. If we can't get together and do something about that.
Well, it was certainly a financial incentive for
Yes.
them to join because
Yeah.
of the ADA assessment that all urban communities are assessed. So that was a big reason behind them
In
joining.
the islands, it's a cider group takes care of their own.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
They
Yep.
do a good job up there.
They do a fantastic job. Jordan actually used to work for me, and now
Oh,
he's the
really?
executive director out there. So he's doing a fantastic job. And then just one other thing to note here is with the separation between Essex Junction and Essex Town, I always get confused. I believe that's the two. They are going to each have representation on the board. I believe that'll be taken care of in the next 12 months or so. So then just the mission of GMT is to promote and operate safe, convenient, accessible, innovative, and sustainable public transportation services in the Northwest and Central Vermont region that reduce congestion and pollution, encourages transit-oriented development, and enhances the quality of life for all. And then the services, there's a wide variety. I think a lot of folks look at GMT and they think, it's just fixed route or commuter services, but there's quite a lot more than that. So, we do provide fixed route, but there's a lot of demand response in this area, specifically the MyRide pilot that's going on. You've probably seen that, which is micro transit. We provide Medicaid service, which are for folks that are on that program that need to go to doctor's offices or appointments. And then the elderly and disabled program, which is for folks that are over the age of 65 or have a disability. They can get rides to the shopping or to the supermarket or to doctor's offices as well. One of the newer ones is the job access and recovery, which helps folks that are getting out of recovery that need to, transportation to a job or whatnot. And then ADA, which we don't actually do the service ourselves, but we contract that out to SSTA in Chittenden County. And then in the rural area, we provide that with the deviating fixed route. We have a number of partners to accomplish our missions. CIDR, as we just spoke of, is one of them in the Grand Isle region. They also help out in Franklin County. SSTA, as I mentioned, does provide ADA and elderly and disabled in Chittenden County. Volunteer drivers are a huge help, and one we need many more of. So if you know a volunteer driver,
Must have
please.
25, 30 SSTA buses. I bet there's quite a few.
SSTA, yeah, has a very large fleet. It escapes me exactly how many buses they have. Ross probably does know that. But
25.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, an operation.
Parked over Colchester, the other side of Colchester, Essex Road there. They provide a lot of service.
Yeah.
As go to senior housing, you see them all the time.
yeah, there's a lot of demand for ADA, E&D, and then they have their own Medicaid program as
Okay.
well. So they provide that in Chittenden County. And then Community Rides Vermont is actually our newest one. I think you've probably seen testimony from them recently. Capstone Community Action, I think, is the parent of that. And so they're going to be helping us in Washington County with a lot of the demand response trips that we have. And then just funding. GMT is a little bit different than other transit agencies where we actually had two divisions, urban and rural. So the urban division is really Chittenden County, and it's a little bit different in how the money flows. So a good share of the funds on the urban side actually flow directly to us from the FTA. Ross provides a significant amount of funding on the urban side still as well, that he provides in our state grant agreement each year. And then on the rural side, really all of the funds besides the local funds that come to us from the individual towns and cities comes directly from VTrans. So today, the reason the yellow column is highlighted is because, sorry.
What would you say the population split is between urban and rural, as far as who you're servicing?
Population split of Chittenden County to
Or just
Washington.
your urban and rural? I mean, are you serving the same amount of people in the rural area, or just Chittenden County is more condensed?
I mean, I would think that Chittenden County is larger. I honestly don't know off the top of my
That's
head with the
fine. Just curious.
population. I can certainly get that for you.
My memory is that it's almost, that our urban operation has more rides provided than all transit and the rest of Vermont combined times 2, I think is there.
Exactly.
My point, I guess my point being is that you look at the part of the money split, the operating revenues, and it looks like you have a lot more opportunity in those urban areas to gather more fees to ride.
Sure, and I think that's why, fares bringing back on the rural side just hasn't been something that has been a real concern. We didn't generate enough fare box recovery on the rural side to really warrant bringing fares back. But Ross may have a different opinion on that than me. But on the urban side, certainly fares generate. And I actually have a chart that'll show you. At one point, was providing over 20% of our overall budget. Now that's much lower for a number of reasons, which I'll get into. But the urban.
If I could just interject, one of the things to follow on Senator Engels' statement there is that our urban fares, about a quarter of them were paid by organizations like Champlain College, UVM, University of Vermont Medical Center. And so absolutely, there's large employers on the urban side that will fund transit that you probably wouldn't see on the rural side.
Yeah, and the good thing about, just add a little bit on that, is that's called the Unlimited Access Program. Really, UVM, same like Champlain College, and there's some other businesses that take part in that, but we're actually able to recognize a portion of that as local funds. So we look to hopefully grow that in the future years.
You split a route with RCT, the Route 2.
Mhm.
So on the rural, then you're reflecting the cost of providing that route that you're picking up versus RCT.
I believe we do that with Actor as well. Yes,
Oh, with any
correct.
of the
Yeah.
other
In fact, we actually collect, I know for Actor, we collect a certain amount of assessments for that. And we send a check to them each year for their portion of the revenue that they deserve for that route. So, so today we're going to focus just on the urban side, because that's why we're here today talking about fare free on the urban side. And this is our budget approved for FY24. We will be doing an adjustment in the coming months once we have our state grant agreement with VTrans. So this could change dramatically. Typically the budget adjustment does. But at this point in time, you'll see the urban side is about a $17.7 million operation. With the majority of the revenues coming from federal, state, and local sources. We are budgeting roughly $2 million in fares, so you can see that 2.2. The remainder is made up of some other operating revenues that we have that are, advertising income, things like that. But for the most part, 85 or 86% of the funds for the urban side are brought in by public dollars. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
How much or what percentage of your workforce is unionized?
A very large percentage. Really, it's only the administrative staff that is not unionized. So we have 3 collective bargaining agreements. We have the urban drivers, the rural drivers, and then the maintenance folks, which covers both urban and rural.
The only thing I'd add to that is our seasonal drivers for Stowe and Sugarbush are non-union as well.
Or we do have some operators that help us out during the seasonal service that will drive out there, so for extra work. Yeah. So in terms of the operating funds that come in to fund the urban system, you'll see the majority of it is federal, state, and local. If you look at every dollar that is in our FY24 budget, 54 cents of it is federal, followed by 13 cents of state, 20 cents roughly of local, and then the remainder is really fares and other operating revenues. So as I was saying before, a very large share of public dollars to fund this operation. And then this is just the same thing, only breaking out the actual dollar amount. So you'll see that we've got about $9.6 million of federal funds coming in for FY24 that we're planning on. About $2.3 million of state, local is about 3.6, and then fares, as I mentioned before, we're budgeting a little over $2 million of fares in FY24.
So I just took a quick skim of the advanced slides. I don't see you speaking to this, but the fares is the really key piece of the pie here that we're talking about. Can you disambiguate within that fares for the urban division some amount of
What's that word,
disambiguate? So
Wow.
separate.
Sure.
Split apart.
Can we take a break?
Yes,
Yeah, I'm gonna write
Can I
this.
Google that?
You use a lot of big words. Like,
Whoa.
So,
Just for the
The only one letter I can get with that word is a D.
Yeah. He's a teacher at UVM, so.
It's a word, right?
Ambiguate is?
Well, can we just go back to the simple things like stuckage? Stuckage. I like stuckage.
Separate.
Yeah.
Within the fair's pies, could you separate out or split apart any amount that is coming from the commuters, like the longer hauls versus the around town dollars? When you pay $4 to get down here to Montpelier, do you have any category, how much is of that slices from that?
so I unfortunately don't have that right in front of me. I could certainly get with that projection because, you know, we did a projection of what the split out was, but I imagine it's much, much lower than it was pre-pandemic because of the fact that the link, you know, the state is doing a lot of work from home that has really impacted those routes. So I think the percentage of the overall pie is probably fairly low in that projection.
Just to confirm the links are part of that pie, though, the urban piece.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then just sources of local funds. So, you know, there is a good deal of revenue that is raised each year through assessments by all the member communities on the urban side. You'll see that Burlington pays the vast share of that, followed by South Burlington and Essex, and then much smaller amounts in their other communities like Winooski and Shelburne and Williston. These are raised through a number of assessments. Fixed route is the largest. We do have a capital assessment that we do assess. And then we have ADA, which generates a large share of the revenue as well. Burlington has some other special assessments like the College Street Shuttle and some extra service, but you can see it's vastly paid by Burlington because obviously they have the largest amount of service, so that makes sense. You have a question?
Just to be clear, you might want to speak to the formula that's in statute that how these numbers are determined. So it's not just picking randomly assessment.
No, so it's based on the amount of fixed route in your area. We are going to be hopefully doing an adjustment to that. It's a little outdated at the moment, but we're working on that. ADA is actually separated out by each year. We estimate what the total cost of that program is going to be. And then we look at the most recent fiscal year's completed rides and then allocate that out by their proportion of rides. We are meeting this month actually to talk about reforming that assessment because it can be very volatile for a community. So if a high flyer, you know, an ADA or individual moves into one area and they ride every single day, you know, you can have a community jump from they used to be 20% one year to 50% the next year. And so we want to try to smooth that out so communities have more predictability in what their ADA assessment is going to be. But one point I do want to make is that once we calculate the total cost and separate it out, we actually cut it in half what we raise for that. So we give everybody a 50% discount on their ADA assessment of what the total cost is. That's been a huge, you know, headwind.
How do you make it up? How do you?
Well, so I think when this formula was created long time ago, we were getting a significant amount of federal funds. And so we said, okay, we only need to raise the 50% match on that. That has since changed. So that's going to have to be something the Board of Commissioners is going to have to talk about, raising that from maybe 50 and growing it up to, you know, close that gap because as I will go through in a couple slides, we do have a federal funds issue in the coming years. So, and then this is the same exact thing. It's just broken out by proportion. So as I mentioned before, Burlington pays over 50% of the local dollars that are raised on the urban side, followed by, you know, South Burlington, Essex, and the remaining communities.
Too much, but I want to crystallize a point that came up in previous conversations that the member communities have agreed to that formula and they're sent a bill and they have to pay it. That is not the case for the non-member communities that we provide services in. And that's been a frustration point for GM, not a frustration, a time that demands attention and resources to collect that assessed amount based on how much we service our community. If you want to know
so
that.
that's really on the rural side. So yeah, so on the rural side, it's a much different structure. You know, there's no member communities. We really have donations that we raise from all of them, and it can be very hard, even though we are technically a municipality. we've struggled with, all of the work that has to go into getting into the budget, raising, you have to get a certain amount of signatures. It's just been a tremendous amount of work for our staff. So we haven't made really a lot of progress on raising additional revenues on that side. So I think that's why Mr. Fowle's study, which I'm not sure if you folks have seen, but does look for ways to raise those funds in a different manner.
So there are other towns in Chittenden County though, like Richmond.
Yeah, so there are some other towns that, and there are some that aren't members, but do provide local operating assistance in our budget. So I think we have a little over $90,000 that we raised in local operating assistance. That's towns like Jeffersonville and Cambridge and things like that.
So how do you assess, because they're not a member town, but how does Colchester pay? What, is that something that Colchester in itself sees the value in the service and says, hey, we want you to be there, so we'll give you this much, or how does that work?
So Colchester's a member, so they
Okay.
technically have to
Okay,
provide, pay.
I missed that.
No, that's fine. And then
Non-voting.
Are they officially a member yet?
they are a member, they're just a non-voting member. So they don't
Why
have
would they be a non-voting member? Just,
You'll have to ask
Okay.
the town manager.
so they're getting an assessment. They're getting an assessment
Yeah.
part from GMT.
The major reason I think they joined, which also, I assume they do want a seat eventually, is because of that 50% ADA assessment. And we were very clear to them when they joined, this could be going away in the future. So, just realize
And
that.
you do Severance Corners, it must be 500 apartments there, 400 or 500. You stopped there away from Milton.
Yeah.
I see the bus going there. Because they're inside Route 7 anyway, right on the bus. So I know you do that, but the
Yeah.
rest of Colchester, we gotta talk about that sometime.
They pay the per mile fee.
They pay, when we did it, we looked at how much fixed route was in their area or commuter service, and then we, assessed them based on that, as well as they had to pay a capital contribution over 2 years. That was roughly $40,000, I believe. And then obviously they're ADA. So what was happening before was they were not a member, but we were still assessing them like they were, only they paid 100% of their ADA. And so they were like, we should become a member and only pay 50%. So that was a big driver of, I think, why they joined. So yeah.
Problem Colchester is so split out. It borders
Right,
Milton, it borders Essex, it borders Muskie, it borders Burlington. It's so split out. We don't have a downtown Colchester. That's the problem.
That's sort of South Burlington too. You're all over the place. I never can figure out where South Burlington is.
South, it's.
The north is the
East,
airport,
yeah,
it's.
southeast.
uh,
Are there any towns that have fixed route service that don't get an assessment for some reason?
Jared Funder.
Yeah, I think some of those communities that don't, like, there's a decent,
bus
a little
actually
bit of
goes through.
service. They're mostly commuter routes, I believe, that don't. Yeah, there's a couple, I believe, do have some service in their area, but don't contribute.
I didn't say not contribute, but it's always a negotiation with that select board to say, this is how much we'd like you to pay, and they don't have an obligation to pay it. So new select board members can come on and start
Save some money,
off, and that's a lot of voting.
Or they'll say, we're not gonna pay, and that's just the end of it. So, because we don't want to cut the service, so,
Right.
but yeah. So.
The homestead.
In terms of the operating cost structure, as you'll see, a very large share of the money that comes in is just spent on straight salary and benefits. And I just want to be clear, this is just from the operating budget, so this doesn't include our capital budget. But looking at the operating cost structure, over 60% of the funds are spent on salary and benefits. General and admin is fairly small. 9 cents. Maintenance is the third largest at about 15 cents of each dollar is spent on maintenance. And then contractors, that's really ADA. So, SSTA, Colchester providing ADA service, and then planning and marketing.
And like capital, which I would like bus purchasing, that would be general and admin.
No, so capital's not included in
It's
this.
not
We
operating.
have a separate capital budget each year that we pass. This is just what the operating costs are of the organization. So that's a good point. Probably should have a slide on there breaking out vehicles and each dollar. That would be helpful. So it's a good idea for an update of the presentation.
One of the things that I want to add here is that coming to GMT, I've been really surprised at how lean it is as an operation. We have 180 employees roughly. We don't have a single clerk, receptionist, administrative assistant. It is a very,
It's kind of like the legislature.
yeah. So you know how hard it is to keep up on everything without that type of staff. And so it certainly, I just want you to know that there's not a lot of fat to cut on our admin. I think we've already probably cut to the bone already. And
So now onto the financial outlook. So we are approaching a fiscal cliff, and I'll go over the reasons why. Not that it makes me feel any better, but we're certainly not the only one. Public transit in general is having a lot of struggles in terms of, reduced ridership because of working at home, and the COVID funds came in and I think really propped the system up during the pandemic, and now they're going away, and I don't think there's any expectation that the federal government is going to start printing more money, especially in this inflationary environment.
I think they printed all they can print.
Yeah, I think that printing press is probably out of ink at this point.
So
Yeah.
tells you something.
One of the reasons why that we're approaching this fiscal cliff, and this chart reflects that, is kind of two reasons. Growth in operating expenses. As we mentioned, we're a unionized workforce, so we have raises every single year. And you'll see, especially since the pandemic, and you'll see the effect of that inflationary environment since FY21, the slope of that operating expense line, which is the dark blue line, has really elevated and grown exponentially. And then the purple line at the bottom is our fares, which has, as you can see, stayed fairly flat or decreased over time. And then the green line is really our fare box recovery rate. So it's the percentage those fares represent of our overall operating budget. So, during FY12, FY13, we were able to pay, over 20% of our operating costs for fares. In FY24, we're expecting to be able to pay 11%. So that's a real problem, and that kind of drives why we're spending more federal and state and local funds, is because, the fares are making up a much smaller pie. You'll notice during the pandemic, FY21 to FY23, it's zero. We raised none. So those funds had to be made up somewhere. It was made up by COVID and other federal funds.
So is your number of rides roughly mirror that fair percentage line?
So the number of rides is still down. I think we're at like 85% or so of what pre-pandemic ridership was. Don't quote me on that number though. I think it is in that ballpark. So we're still below, and definitely the commuter routes have really suffered, and that really has definitely affected fares because they paid much higher level. I mean, it was $4 each way. I used to ride the Link every day, so it's $4 each way, and now there's just a much smaller amount of people riding those routes. We have really good fare box recovery rates on those when they were packed. And unfortunately, definitely an effect of work from home. We've tried to use smaller buses doing those routes now. I think we have some cutaways, operating those routes, but if you look at what the direct costs or the marginal cost of providing our services, like X capital, it's really labor and benefits. And unless you're going to lay people off, which is, your benefits, or reduce, not have someone driving the bus, the direct cost is still, going to be there.
So the
So,
bigger buses are more comfortable.
yeah, I mean, we save certainly on probably maintenance and capital investment and fuel, but
They last longer too. The cutaways don't have nearly as long of a lifespan, right?
they're a lot cheaper. So,
To buy.
yeah. So,
But
they have
I might
about,
not ride the bus. If I was going from Burlington, I would I'd much more rather take the big bus than the
oh, absolutely. They have Wi-Fi on them,
Yeah.
comfortable seats, the capital investment is certainly much higher. And I think it certainly made sense. We actually bought specific buses for those, with the nicer seats and internet. But when there's only a fraction of the people on those
Are they
vehicles
like half
now,
full now, or what?
I think the
You don't ride them
cutaways-
either because you're working from home.
Yeah,
Or
well, I
you don't work
don't
here
come up here anymore, so, but I have heard that they're not.
I think that we have a frequent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Who can tell us?
Well, they steal their catalytic converter off.
Yeah. Right, maybe that was GMT that's doing it.
Yeah, they're the converter business now.
No, but I do know transit agencies who have also lost their catalytic converters.
Well, that
Yeah,
we are
that's-
one of them, so, yeah.
You know, my observation on the morning commute in, I take a 7:25 bus from the Richmond Park and Ride down to the State House, and typically I'll take the 4:10 home. And sometimes I've gone on later afternoon buses, closer to 5, which have had more ridership. But I'm seeing buses typically a third to sometimes a half full. Like a half full is like, well, we're having a good day today.
Yeah,
So it used to be standing room.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I took it from National Life for many years and lots of standing room opportunities, both going in and coming out. And we had those much bigger coach buses at that time too.
You think if they, you say Richmond, that's where they are. What if the new Park and Ride opens up and it stopped there? Is that gonna make a benefit, you think?
Well, we certainly hope we can integrate a stop at that location because it is right there at the
Right there,
interstate and we
yeah,
think we
interstate,
can
yeah.
draw ridership there as
You don't have
well.
to drive to Richmond or.
Yeah, and
like that.
that was, you know, one of the things we looked at when we decided to add that
okay.
Park and Ride. So hopefully that will help. But, you know, I think telecommuting is the biggest driver in terms of
Right.
why we have so few riders
Oh,
now.
sure. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
A lot of the people that would, you know, come to National Life or even here.
Right. Go
and-
one day a week, probably, or
Yeah.
2 days instead of the 5 days.
Exactly.
That's it.
So changing environment.
You know, I've always been, I've always been supportive of fare boxes, but you sent out this memo here, and it's a very good explaining why, when you want to do it, not do it, because it makes a lot of sense. Once I read that, it was, it opened up my eyes about, writers, fare box is good, but there's a time and place when you can do it. If in the fair in Burlington, is it the same fare all over the city when you jump on a bus?
Yes.
Like $1 or whatever, 50 or whatever it is. So it's the same, whether you ride it for 10 miles or 2 miles, it's correct. It's the same price.
Correct.
And how about credit cards? Can people put credit cards when you have a fare box?
When our new fare box system will allow for credit cards,
Okay.
smartphones, all of that to be able to pay right on the bus.
My business is all credit card city. Nobody knows.
Do you have the cards that you can load, like on
Yeah.
subways?
Yeah.
That would be part of it as
You'll have a
well.
GMT card.
Yeah, that's certainly an option.
Okay, because that's the whole world today.
Couple for London. You have to go back.
Yeah.
This morning I cashed up my store, and it was that much cash, it's all credit cards, and everybody, I don't care if it's $1, $1.50.
Yeah.
That's the world today. I don't know what cash.
Yeah, and I want to point out that's going to be a headwind for sure because, we're going to have a much higher percentage of credit card
Right.
usage and
And
there's
that's the
fees
fees.
come along with
Oh,
that.
I know.
So we had mobile ticketing before the pandemic. I don't think there was a decent amount of people that used it, but it wasn't, a material cost. But I think with these new fare boxes and the convenience of using a credit card or your smartphone, it's going to be more expensive and hopefully it won't have it, but if we could see it, further dip in that fare box recovery, I think the board is going to have to seriously consider, the level of fares.
Right,
in
yeah,
the
no,
future.
it's a whole new world we're in now. If they go on with cash, you have to make change if the person has a $5 bill or something. You have to have the
They have
exact.
to have
change.
Yeah.
exact.
And that creates a conflict point with
Yeah,
the
because
drivers.
nobody carries, the gas days are gone.
Yeah.
So that's
It's also
one issue.
security and
Yes.
cashing out, so
It's a
there's
lot of
cost
Well,
associated.
and we have to count it,
Right.
each week we do cash count, there's costs of that, they have to be, the cash has to be transported and.
That is the
so it's-
plus side on
Of course.
the credit cards. 'cause
Absolutely,
you
yeah,
eliminate
we
all
will
of
be very happy about
And
that.
the other thing,
so,
that they use their phone, it takes a second, you just hit the phone on the
Yeah.
thing now, they don't even have to put the
Yeah.
card in the thing, and it's automatic, it takes 1 second to go, Go ahead.
Could you also, and so I just want to be clear, we do GMT has 2 different fares, the $1 around town and then the links, which are $4, right? So there is that difference.
Yes.
And then the other piece, if you could maybe speak to, by not having fares, the organization is part of CATMA or the large employers, they haven't been contributing, but with bringing fares back, could you explain a little bit how with the dollar fares coming back, how University of Vermont and the others would then be contributing when they use their employee select cards?
So I do want to point out in FY '23, they did contribute.
Oh, they did, okay.
We put them on a fixed contract amount, so they pay per student. And they will continue to pay, moving forward. They didn't pay, those other years during the pandemic. We did ask, but I think, everybody was struggling during that time, so it made sense. But yeah.
I'll be meeting with CATMA tomorrow, and I think that the expectation is that we would continue to bill per student until we go back to fair service, and then we would go to them paying the direct cost.
Yeah.
So what is your request today?
$1 million.
Yeah, our request today is to support the T-bill as introduced, which includes $1 million to extend.
Introduced from the agency?
No, from the House.
From the House, okay, the House. It was not in your budget. Okay, so from the House, $1 million is what we haven't gone over the bill yet, but.
And they moved the million from maintenance to fund this one time.
Yes,
And
and
that
then
would give us till when? That's until
until January 1st of 2024.
24.
And that gives us the time to procure and implement these, the new systems. And then also to do the public education on the different options that they're gonna have. And one of the things that is included in that is that House Transportation wanted us to provide a reduced fare plan so that we would be able to demonstrate that our most vulnerable populations would have a discounted fare opportunity. And so, which we support. We were actually working on what we've been calling fair fares to have a tiered system so that those who pay can pay a higher amount, and that those who are vulnerable.
How would you classify it? How would you distinguish that?
That is the work that we're going to have to be doing with, I've already reached out to AHS, to some of our local nonprofits to figure out how would we want to make this determination. And because we would also have to be able to operationalize it in a way that's easy and doesn't require a lot of paperwork.
But on the other hand, if it's only $1, you would discount the dollar also to be less.
Well, so the current fare level is $1.75, and then the reduced rate is at 90.
I believe so, yeah.
90. And so I think that if we return in January, that there's a good chance that there would be an increase to the full rate, and because that hasn't been risen in 5 or 6 years.
Maybe like $2.
To $2.
Maybe like $1.
Exactly. And so that folks who are, say if you're a recipient of 3 squares, then you would pay the $1. And if you weren't, then
So you have to get a card or
Well, they
something.
have an EBT card.
right. So that, and we would be looking to figure out how to operationalize that.
Would you ban cash altogether?
No, we are choosing to go with a system that would still accept cash because there's some people that just will accept.
I don't think legally we can.
Okay, I
Yeah,
didn't know.
yeah.
And to simplify the reduced fares and all that, you can't have it on all venues of how you're gonna pay. You're gonna have to have these people apply for a specific card that's gonna recognize that they're eligible for the reduced fare.
And so that, in all likelihood, yes, but there will be situations like when we talk about the zero fares that will continue, which is the students and the folks that CATMA supports, because those riders just show their ID card and they get on for free. There may be options if we have folks that have other type of identifiers that they wouldn't have to go through a process.
Like the EBT is a verification of low income because it's a food stamp
Right.
access. And that's a fairly broad, that's a big program.
It is, but one of the things that we're also going to be doing is making sure that we do it in a way that doesn't, that respects the privacy of folks, so that if they come on the bus, they're not having to be like, oh, everybody knows that that's,
It's like the school lunches at school.
exactly.
Everybody's treated equally.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've been this route before, no pun intended, as far as trying to.
I don't.
Advocating for that? I thought Bobby Starr was.
Well, yeah, Bobby Starr, as you know, on the floor, yes, he said this program would cost us, we have to come up with $3.5 million next year on the what's the issue?
On the.
Flavor track.
Flavor
Oh.
track.
Yeah.
The lost revenues.
But just a few weeks ago, he told me another $3 million, one way or the other, $200 million school budget's nothing.
Yeah.
That's nothing, he said, so he He's good.
Well, you can argue,
Yeah, in both ways.
he's pragmatic.
Yeah, right. Okay, go on. sorry.
So as far as if we can agree to this $1 million, we can expect that by this point in time, this discussion as far as the fare boxes and all that will be over and it'll be implemented and all of that, because we talked about this last year. And I thought that we were gonna be further down the road than what we were, and, but we're not, it's what it is. But that gets you where you wanna be.
Yes, and I can tell you that we've already gotten approval for the procurements for the fare boxes, so that, you know, the buses left the station as far as that is.
And you have the ability, the supply chain is okay, you have it, you have them in your hand, you can do it, and on you go, and then we're just ready to go, rock and roll.
You may not have them quite in hand, but.
Well, we don't have them in hand, but the orders they're in the capital budget. We just passed that.
But
and
you
we're gonna order
contacted the people that supply them, and
absolutely,
they
yeah.
have them, and they have.
Yeah,
the
we have a
ability to do
timeline
that.
on them. I think they're 12 weeks or so out.
Yes.
Or maybe
Now,
that's not
Ross,
correct.
just for the input from AOT, any questions you have at this point or?
No, we really appreciate Ross McDonald, Public Transit Program Manager, very appreciative of GMT's plans to do the work for the fare assessment and to take a step back and to produce a sustainable fare program is something that we support. And yes, timing isn't perfect, but there's been a lot of issues and turnover at that facility. So we feel like they're on the right track, and we'll work with them throughout. Because we haven't gone through the grant process yet, we haven't gotten the grant applications for FY24. It's difficult for us to project exactly who's going to need what. So at this time, you know, there's no way we could take 1 million out of our $9 million state funds just for this one particular project. So very much appreciate the consideration.
But the House found the $1 million by moving it from another part of the transportation plan.
Where it always comes from, right? Comes from maintenance, really.
Right, but there's quite a bit of flexibility
Well, I think
within that all state funded. That's why it's so attractive for moving money from it to other places, because it doesn't, it's all state dollars. So you have a position on the $1 million?
Well, our position is that we stand behind the governor's recommended budget.
Jeez, I'm so surprised.
And, you know, I think in conversations in the House, one of the things we were looking at was the reserve fund that GMT has built up over the past few years. And we always want a healthy reserve fund with 3 months operating to make sure that organizations don't, you know, run the risk of having an immediate closure, as we've seen sometimes in the past with transit agencies. So that is a consideration. You know, I think we all hope that the return to fares could happen sooner than January 1st, because the administration has supported return to fares for the urban area, continued fare free for the rural. So there have been some compromises that have been put on.
You danced around that well, but at least it's not an ongoing reallocation. It's to provide this bridge until this, you've got the equipment and.
Would you suggest that $1 million comes from some other place, or is that, how is it?
There really isn't any other place in our budget that would.
Otherwise, you're affecting the federal draw. and
Yeah, exactly.
That's why maintenance all state
Well, I
dollars.
just want to get it clear today. It would be nice.
Snow shed at the airport might not get built.
Yes. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Could I just make a couple
Sure, go ahead.
points? So on the urban side, you know, we do have a fund balance policy, which is we want to always have at least 2 months of fund balance on hand. Right now on the urban side, we're like literally directly at 2 months. So if we spent $1 million of our fund balance, that would certainly cut that in half. And then the second thing I want to point out is that we just need $1 million of funds. So if it was to be 500,000 of state operating and then 500,000 of federal funds, say, you know, the 5311 flex or something like that, that would certainly
Agnostic,
be-
they just need the millions.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? So I just want to point that
That's
out.
interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
And it is something that this is why we don't have a position, at this point, because we haven't gone through the process to negotiate FY24 awards. But certainly,
It's a ball there, man.
that flex of $3 million from our FHWA funds directly to GMT is now at 4.4 million. It used to be 3 million every year. We continue to try to meet them where they need to be on any annual basis. We'll continue to work with them. We hope that $1 million in T funds won't be needed. But until I get everybody, it would seem unfair if I start making obligations outside of the grant process.
Well, we could do some kind of contingent.
Well,
you know.
that's why I'm having this discussion. We're all in the same room together. It's nice to have a
We
discussion
can,
about
we
it.
can do that, so the million only is contingent if in fact this other funding structure doesn't
I
materialize.
think a 500,000 there may serve us well. We talked about moving back towards 1 million from the 4.3. This is what Nick and I talk about weekly. We'll continue to hammer this out. Maybe we can do it for less than $1 million. I'm hoping you're able to raise 2 fairs, sooner than January.
I just want to point, we wouldn't need $1 million. I mean, whatever the mix is,
Fine, fine.
we would, yeah, okay.
The
great.
mix makes a big difference.
Yeah.
They just need the million.
Maybe if Blake's could drive bus once a
Yeah, exactly.
week.
They told me I'm not qualified.
Lucky you.
Lucky me. So something I do want to, just to respond to Ross, if the H479 passes as introduced, there's a requirement that we go through a fair development process that's reviewed by the House Transportation Committee, and December 1st is the first time where they get that final report. So I don't think that we would be able to restart fairs before January 1st.
Well, we can always look at that language. Just because the House put it in doesn't mean that it can be
Yes.
modified.
I just want to make sure that we,
The bus has left the house.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right.
but
So they love it.
Yeah,
They
it is.
love
In our
federal
service,
mandates,
it
don't
is.
they?
It is.
They can't help themselves.
We'll have the House bill probably next week.
Oh, no,
Right. Now,
you don't need to agree.
I want to make sure we have this discussion today openly, and we all can work together and come up with some answers. Because we're going to be faced with this decision in a week or so, so we got to.
We might need some suggestions on the language around what gets reported back. Because the last thing we want to do is, first of all, add more work, and toward what end? What, I don't know what it would give. It would add delay and maybe constrain what can be done. So if there's, I guess we could just remove it entirely
Mhm.
if we determine it doesn't have sufficient benefit to require the work.
Well, yeah.
You have to help us determine that.
And I also want to make sure that we're, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's on this point, so maybe, okay, I'll jump in. So I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, that the language regarding the fare for the most vulnerable populations, if anything, you see that as an inhibitor from adopting fare sooner than you might be ready. So if you were ready for fare with the fare boxes in September, you wouldn't feel comfortable instituting them because of this current language.
Yes, and also I think that it is going to take a considerable amount of time educating the public. One of the things that really concerns us is that with our urban operations, we receive a direct federal apportionment from FTA that has the potential to have decreased ridership, decrease those funds. And so what we don't want to do is create a situation where there's confusion about using transit that amplifies the decrease. So it's definitely a public affair communication process as well as a hardware process.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that, but I also want to make sure that we get to a point to where we're getting back to collecting fares, and that we're not just collecting fares just to give it all back again. I mean, so we got to have an equitable situation to where we are helping the most vulnerable, but that it's actually just going to get you guys to your mission to where you can be more sustainable, and just not giving the money back just because we're collecting it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that is certainly one of my concerns, is that, how do we make up for the revenue that we would lose from creating this program? And so we'll have to discuss that. So I only have a couple more slides, and they're actually the most important ones, I think, of the presentation. So this next slide, the reason number 2, we really just can't spend this loss of fare revenue on with our fund balances, our COVID relief balances are really starting to dry up. As you can see in FY20 and FY21, we were flush with federal funds, 100%, required no local match. But we have certainly spent those over the years to the point where at the end of FY24 we expect to only have $1.9 million left.
That's a big drop.
So yeah, it's a considerable amount. So that's going to be certainly a challenge in the coming years, because we've really been using those COVID relief balances to make up for the deficit in local funds. So right now we're not generating enough local funds to match or to leverage all the federal funds we need. The COVID funds are really kind of, essentially getting us out of having to raise assessments by a significant amount on our local urban members. So, and I'll go over that in my next couple of slides.
But I wanted to go back to
Sure.
the comment about the fares. And so this all language is instructing you to do that. But inherent in doing that is it has a revenue impact.
Yes.
So are we, through this language, what the House is proposing is to have you provide a higher subsidy to certain populations that we don't want to fund?
Well,
Or did they fund, I mean, they're tying it to the $1 million, which is a one-time
yes,
bridge.
yes.
Could be less depending on how this match works. I just want to make sure that people are clear, if you're being given this requirement
Yes.
to implement, that if it has a price tag, was that discussed? Because that has an impact, I would think, unless you're gonna cross-subsidize within your rate structure, the lower rates for some, but a higher rate for more. But ultimately, you've got to figure out the impact on your bottom line.
Absolutely.
So that's the question. I assume the House would have talked about that.
They did not. And so I can tell you that the good news is that we're projecting fare revenue in fiscal year 24 of approximately 1.9 million. We're expecting ridership of 1.8 million, even with the reduction in ridership. So the average cost of fare is only going to be a little over $1 to get that amount. So even if a significant portion of our riders receive the discounted rate, it would still get us to that average that we would need to reach that financial projection. And so it just happens that it worked out that I think that we can absorb that.
Okay, well, otherwise,
Yeah,
you would be having.
You'll be back for another $1 million.
exactly.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
But your special SSTA takes care of those people who, medical reasons and all that, right?
Yes, and
So who you think would classify as the other group of people that are going to get the discount?
well, we were going to go through a process. The language required us to work with local human services agencies. And I've already reached out to AHS to get their perspective. And so it would probably be, as suggested before, somebody perhaps who was on EBT,
Right.
Would be able to get that. And I would guess that probably a majority of our riders may be eligible for EBT.
Well, that's why I made the point earlier, is that you just can't have it on every modes of the way people are gonna pay. It has to be proven someplace along the way, like Senator Kitchell has said, that it has to be someplace that's deserving of, they've been proven to be in that category.
Yes,
And it's not just
yes.
somebody trying to get a cheaper fare.
But if you want to do that through your public transit system, if you don't have a sufficient offsetting revenues,
No.
then what you would be asked to do is provide an unfunded benefit.
Yes.
That's my concern,
Yes.
the extent to which that would be the end result here.
Yeah, and definitely mine as well. I think we need to have a conversation with the state about, is there maybe some funds in human services that could help support that reduction or benefit, so.
And definitely part of our fare plan, even though it wasn't a discussion at House Transit or House Transportation, we're going to provide the costs, estimates when we provide that plan to them, because that will have to be a factor that we consider.
and then add on the credit card fees to that, I think we could be looking at having to certainly update that projection.
And so your plan then would really have to project that all out.
Yes.
Because it could be that the average isn't going to cover it, and you're going to say, this is fine, but if you want to do it, then this is the price tag.
I think that would be, the preferred method, for sure, to get some discussion on what this could really cost.
Well, maybe we need to make that clear,
Yeah, I think
that
so.
this has to be part of the analysis, and that is the plan, and where, and how you would fund it. Because it could very well be that this is going to fall back onto the agency.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think I would also point out that to the extent that we are trying to balance it on the backs of the riders that can pay, there's a diminishing return there, in
Sure.
particular in light of the fact that so many people are teleworking. If I have to pay.
And they're usually the higher wage workers.
Yeah, I mean, for me, so if we raise the commuter rate to $5 and I had to pay $10 a day to go from Richmond to Montpelier in my Prius Prime that gets 50 miles a gallon, I'm probably not going to take the bus. I can get a little work done on the bus. It's a little more relaxing, but when I can drive here for $3 versus taking the bus for 10, it becomes a really different model.
Absolutely.
If I may, when we heard about this fare plan, we thought this is a really great thing. Wouldn't this be best viewed and studied once fares are reinstituted, as they have been?
Right.
And then you go through, and then over the next year or two, you have the time and the ability to analyze, rather than if they did this report and the findings were not favorable in December, and they're starting in January with, like that, that's a timing issue potentially as well.
If I can get it right, based on what the data shows versus a fake timeline that has just been forced upon you.
Yeah.
So,
Imperfection get in the way of the good comes to mind to an extent, but we understand where GMT is. This has changed quite a bit. GMT at this time, all full speed ahead. We're going to reinstitute fares. July, it was voted on in December, and just last Tuesday they were approved to go buy those fare boxes. So there's been a change in management and perspective, I think. And so, yeah, to reinstitute fares as quick as possible, maybe by September, without going through all the smart technology, and then going through that fare analyses for fair fares for the next year or two's implementation, with all the outreach that's required, and the admin, and the expense, and the credit cards. That may serve them better, but I don't know.
I don't think we could implement fares by September.
No.
Even if we didn't do all the bells and whistles. I
Yeah.
really don't.
And I think that, what's that?
I said, just talking to your new operations person, he was pretty sure that could happen with 12-week.
Was that Tim?
Yeah. He's on
Tim's
the.
not even working for us yet.
Yeah. And he's also on the rural side, not the urban side.
Right.
But I would suggest, in light of this conversation and the issues that have been raised, if you could give us some proposed modification that actually gives us the benefit of the fares, and look at the time frame, make it very clear that there's a potential, what the estimated cost would be, and how that would, the impact it would have on transportation plan.
I also think we want to do this right, because if we do it wrong, we could lose more ridership than was projected.
Well, I
in
think
the
that's
study.
what Michelle was saying. If
And
you
that affects, as Clayton said, I have a slide on this, it really affects the federal funds we get each year directly from the FTA. We get these things called stick factors, and I'll go over that in the remainder of my presentation.
And I think it's also important to keep in mind that returning to fare service is going to be extremely unpopular. And one of the reasons why I want to have our new technology system in place is for the messaging where it says, hey, we're sorry that we have to reinstate fares, but it will be better than it was before. It'll be more convenient. You'll have additional payment options. So it's not just all bad. Hey, we're going to go back to fares, and it's going to be just the same difficult system that you had before, where if you show up with a $20 bill, that's the cost of your ride.
So, all right. Should
You have
I-
more slides?
Yes, just a couple more. So as I mentioned before, we have a federal funding issue as well. This shows our approved budget for FY '24, and you'll see that we have about $351,000 of COVID relief funds. That essentially represents what we were short in local funds for that fiscal year. So we had to plug that in because we weren't raising enough local funds. We are forecasting in the future to have growing federal shares or federal funds coming from the FTA. But even with that, we're projecting to have an $888,000, or we did have an $888,000 federal deficit in terms of the federal funds we were using in excess of what we were coming at in that given year. And I do want to point out our CBA ends at the end of next fiscal year. So our collective bargaining agreement with the unions. So we project that slope. Well, we hope not, but I don't know if that slope is going to bend down and get flatter, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think it's fair to say that we're going to be looking at 10 to 15% increase in labor costs when that happens.
Particularly if you got CDL drivers.
Yes.
Which
Boy, that can't get open, it's so difficult.
since they shall develop and implement not later than 2024, the plan. So it actually, it's not just submit a plan, it's to implement. Oh, well, you're gonna propose.
Work on that.
And then, number 4, as I said before, the non-federal funds, this just kind of shows what I said before, the $351,000 deficit in local funds in FY '24. Just to give you a sense, if we didn't have those COVID funds, we would have had to raise our assessments on the urban members by 10%. We have never raised assessments larger than 4% in a given year with our urban members. So my expectation, if I came to them with a 10% increase, they would have said no, and we would have had to cut service. So, and then lastly, as I mentioned, the stick factors that we get each year. Really, what this chart shows is the 6 stick factors that the FTA measures. So essentially, each year when we get those federal funds from the FTA, 50% of them are based straight on population. 50% of them are based on these stick factors. You'll see that GMT actually does really well. So we actually generate 4 out of the 6 stick factors. We actually got 1 back just this year. Even with these stick factors, though, we do have a FY '24 deficit of close to 900,000. But I think, if we do this right, if we bring fares back, we minimize the loss of ridership, maybe number one, hopefully we wouldn't lose one of these stick factors, which, by the way, equates to over $550,000 of extra federal funds. Maybe we could get 1 back, and we are very close on a couple of these. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future. But at least we want to make sure that we don't lose any of the ones that we're getting. So and if we did get those other 2 stick factors back, or if we did get those other 2 stick factors, that would equate to $1.1 million of extra federal funds each year. That's greater than the deficit in FY '24 federal funds. So, as I said before, I think, the investment to allow us to do this right and do it by January, which we do believe we can pull that off in that time. Hopefully will be a good investment, because if we lose one of these stick factors, we're likely going to be coming back to VTran and SAS for the funds in other ways. So that's all I have. That's my contact info. I'm happy to, if any of you have any questions about the presentation or want any additional data, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to provide it.
You didn't speak to this, but as you look to bring fares back, I remember my years on the board, I just always see opportunities for volume discounts, so monthly passes, buy in bulk, and if you can couple heavy discounts for just committing to ride the bus more, that helps with the stick factors. It gets people to take the bus more at a lower rate. I know it does decrease your revenues, but if they weren't going to take the bus without that volume discount,
Sure,
rather than on the bus,
Absolutely.
that volume discount.
Absolutely. I think we did do discounts if people bought like a tent ride in the past. So, but we could look to even more, to your point, that it might be worth it to do that. So we'll have to look at the pricing across, all of them.
Senator Chittenden would take the bus every day if we gave a discount.
We had the bracelets for the high school kids, that was popular for a while there.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that people need to put their money where their rhetoric is, or their behavior. And if in fact people are talking and we're getting, you know, the need to reduce carbon footprint, this is one way that people
Yes.
can do it on a very small but personal level. And it's easy to say what, you know, government should fund or not fund, but this is an example where people can, you should appeal to their,
Incentives of bicycles.
their, you know, their desire to have an impact on
Well, and soon we hope to have
fossil
a
fuels.
large percentage of the fleet be electric.
Yeah.
So it'll be even
Yeah.
more of a,
So I'd appeal to that segment too.
Yes.
Keep your Tesla in your yard and ride with us.
yeah.
How's
There we
that?
go. There's a slogan.
Uh-huh.
There you go.
That's Greyhound,
Yeah.
ride with us, remember?
It's better than Gopher.
Gopher.
This is another notion that I always raise on the board. I don't know if there's an update on this, but it really ties to what Senator Kitchell was saying there is, I have rewards programs for Best Buy, I have rewards programs for hotels, I mean, I have rewards programs for everything.
Costco.
Costco, it's the best one. It gets me there a lot. I'm like,
Hey, Tom.
I don't know if you're looking at that, but as you look at these fare boxes, you look at the digital apps, to get a green award, to get a status of greenest transportation rider, or just other ways to give them a free hat or something, but somehow gamify the experience of
No,
motivate.
Yeah.
no
And you-
swag. So much of that just is junk and people don't want it.
And anyone who rides more than 10 times
Yeah,
a
but-
month gets a picture of me with my signature.
I love it.
That's
It's
what-
a
that's what you were saying.
Deposit.
rewards program that works. I just hope that you're keeping that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea for our marketing department.
I
to
absolutely
consider.
Yes.
Okay.
Badge that you're-
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This morning. Thanks for coming and